Hey everybody, today I want to talk about bloodworms, and more specifically I want to talk about why I am going to be phasing bloodworms out of my repertoire of fish food. I do still have some left in the other room. I got a couple packages of it, and so I will go through it, but I'm going to go through it much more sparingly than I have been in the past. And in this video we're going to talk about why that is and why I will not be purchasing any more of them going forward. And the long and short of it is, every time I've used them in any sort of significant manner in a tank, I've had problems with certain fish. Now, I've been thinking about it all morning, and the only fish I can ever remember having problems with, having issues after being fed bloodworms on a fairly regular basis, has been my gouramis. I've had one dwarf gourami get either constipated or bloated or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what was happening, and we'll get into that. I have one in here right now that is blown up like a balloon. I can't believe it's still alive. Again, I don't know if this is constipation. I've had people suggest it's kidney failure and the kidney's not allowing the fluid to be processed properly, and so we're getting the swelling. I don't know. But once again, I'm in a situation where I've been feeding this tank bloodworms fairly regularly, 3 times a week maybe, not an incredible amount, but fairly regularly, and within a month or two I started having problems with my gourami. So I've had 2 3-spot gouramis and 1 dwarf gourami all respond the same way to regular feedings of bloodworms, and I do not know why. I have thought about this and thought about this and thought about this, and I cannot figure out what it is about bloodworms that would be problematic. On paper, not only is there nothing wrong with bloodworms, but in theory they should be really good food. Fish that feed predominantly on insects and insect larvae should be able to live almost solely on these bloodworms. That would be a main part of their diet in the wild. Now, something like a gourami is an omnivore. They do eat insects and insect larvae, but they also eat vegetation and whatnot. But they are capable of eating insect larvae, so it's not like this is some sort of food that's outside their parameters. It's not particularly excessive in terms of protein levels or anything like that. In fact, the frozen bloodworms are only 6% protein, whereas I feed protein pellets or blackworm pellets that have 50% protein, and I never have a problem with that. It's only these bloodworms, and I don't know why. There's a lot of talk in the hobby. There's a lot of misunderstandings about bloodworms. I've already debunked the idea that they contain parasites. I've debunked the idea that they're grown in pig manure and therefore they come with diseases in them. There's a lot of speculations as to what it is about bloodworms that makes them so bad and dangerous for our fish, and there's a reason everybody cautions you and says only feed them occasionally and don't make them a regular part of the diet. So clearly something's going on. Obviously people notice whenever I feed these a lot, I have problems with my tank. And I cannot figure out why that would be. I really can't. I looked into what the exoskeleton of the worm is made out of. I've been thinking about that for a while now. I had been saying that I thought it was made out of keratin, and it is not. It is made out of chitin, which is similar but not really. Cellulose would be for plants, chitin would be for arthropods, insects and mollusks, that sort of thing, and then keratin would be for mammals. Now, cellulose and chitin both evolved very early in the history of life, and then when mammals came along way later is when the keratin evolved. So keratin is actually a protein-based material, whereas the cellulose and the chitin are both polysaccharides. They're sucrose-based, or I'm sorry, glucose-based. They're glucosamines. And so they're digestible. I know just because it's sugar-based doesn't make it automatically digestible. Like glucose, for example, is not digestible unless you have certain enzymes in your gut bacteria that are there for the purposes of digesting the glucose. And the chitin is the same way. You can't simply naturally digest this stuff. But fish who have evolved to eat insects have mechanisms within their body. They produce an enzyme called chitase. They have gut bacteria that is specially there for breaking down the chitin and so on and so. There's no reason why these animals can't eat these worms. There's no reason why they can't digest their exoskeleton. There's simply nothing I can find that tells me what is the big deal with feeding them to the tank. Why does it make certain fish sick? You know, you got my gourami up here that's bloated up like a balloon, and that's the third gourami I've had. Now again, it's only been my gouramis. I'm not seeing any issues with my discus. I'm not seeing any issues with any of the other fish I've ever fed them. It's only been the gouramis. So I do not know what is going on with it. I really do not. I've been looking and looking. I would love to be able to sit here and tell you I've figured out what it is. Some people have suggested it's tank water quality. That's certainly not it. I have had some issues in this tank recently, but that's only because I've started doing more frequent water changes. I've been on top of the water chemistry even more effectively, and my nitrates are really low. The dissolved solids are way down. This tank is cleaner than it's ever been, in those sense, cleaner than it's ever been, and yet now is when I'm starting to have the problems. So I would be more likely to think that my sudden increase in frequency of water changes and so on and so forth would be more of a problem than simply putting bloodworms in the tank. But yet I've had an issue with my big angelfish you can see up there, had some sort of infection on its face that developed bacteria. My tenopoma in this tank has gotten all bloated up and has now developed an infection because it's all bloated up. And of course my gourami up here is all bloated up. And this has all been since I put these discus in the tank and started feeding this tank with bloodworms more regularly. The tenopoma doesn't even eat the bloodworms. So what's going on there, I have no idea. Again, I would chalk that up to the more frequent water changes. The fish is bloating up because there's lower dissolved solids in the water, and that is an African fish, and it's probably used to being in slightly harder water, and so my more frequent water changes might be the culprit there. The only fish that's eating the bloodworms that's having an issue is that gourami. It just keeps coming back to the fact that it's the gourami that seem to have problems with these bloodworms. So whatever it is, I simply do not know. But it's one of those things where it's just not necessary. I do not need to feed those bloodworms to this aquarium or any of my aquariums. It's just something that I can feed it, and people say, oh, you should give it to, as a treat. How do you define a treat to a fish? Do they get excited that they think, oh, we're getting worms today? I like the worms so much better than my regular food that I behave exactly the same way for. It doesn't matter what food I put in there. They gobble it up like it's the first food they've ever seen. And so the idea that I'm like spoiling them or giving them a treat, or, what am I going to clicker train them, and if they come over I give them a little bloodworm as a reward treat or something? Like this treat idea is just silly. That's there to sell the fish keeper on you want to do something nice for your fish, and that's there to play into your sentimentality. There's no need to give our fish a treat. And if this treat that they're getting is low in protein, it's basically water. The bloodworms are basically water. They're 90% water. They got about 6% protein. They got a little bit of crude fat and a very, very tiny little amount of crude fiber, and that's about it. They're not particularly nutritious. They're mostly just water. There's no point in feeding them to my tank. It serves me no purpose. There's no necessity to do that. And so if I don't need to do that, if the fish will be just as healthy with me feeding them my tropical flakes or whatever I'm feeding, and then my granules, I do mix it up. I put algae wafers in the tank. I put sinking shrimp pellets in the tank. I put the black worm pellets in the tank. And so they get a variety of prepared fish foods. I just don't need to do those frozen bloodworms anymore. Again, they don't serve a huge nutritional value. They're not a big bit, again, they just serve me no real purpose. And then again, the idea that it's a treat for my fish, who cares? What am I going to reward them when they're good fish? Give them a gold star and a special treat of bloodworms? It's just silly. So I'm done. I don't know why. But you know what? If every time I ate a certain food, I got a headache an hour later, I may not understand why I'm getting it, but I'm not going to eat that food anymore. I'm just going to stop eating it, whether I understand why or not. I'm just done with it. And I feel the same way about these bloodworms. It may even be coincidental. It may not actually be the bloodworms. Other things may be going on, and it may literally be coincidental But if it is, this is now the third time, coincidentally, that I've had issues with gouramis after going on a fairly steady, and again, when I say steady, I mean like 3 times a week. It's not a lot. It's not like I'm using the bloodworms as their staple food or anything. It was still their, their intermittent food, not their regular food, and yet I'm still having problems. So again, I'm just done. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. Again, there's no truth to the idea that there's parasites in it. They're not grown in pig manure. They're not filthy, disease-ridden. On paper, they're fantastic food. On paper, they should be great. I was reading how trout, now again, it just said trout. It didn't say the size of them, so we could literally be talking about a 3-pound or 4-pound fish, but trout can eat over 1,500 of those bloodworms in a single feeding session in a morning. The 20 or 30 that each one of these fish get in a feeding session a few times a week simply should not be problematic. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm just stumped. I've been reading about this, and I cannot figure out what it is that causes them a problem. But the manufacturers even say not to make this a regular food. The websites that all say how great this is always also recommend feed once in a while, use as a treat once or twice a week. So everybody cautions that. Everybody realizes there's problems if you feed this food too much. I don't know why that is, though. So again, you tell me, let me know what your comments are. I feel like I'm just going around in circles at this point, but I feel like I've been doing that all morning trying to figure this out. So again, you go down in the comment section, you let me know what your thoughts are. I'd be dying to hear them. Don't forget, I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night, and I do a weekly members only live stream if you're interested in that. So you can sign up for basic membership. That'll get you access to the live stream and a few other little perks on there on the membership area. So check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, thanks for watching this one, and I will see you real soon in the next one.